Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm super pleased to have with me today Brian Olds, who is the founder of the Black Speakers Network. And Brian and I met many years ago, Brian, and I've tried my best to remember before we got on this call. I feel like it is through a mutual friend or through the Toastmasters organization. Somehow we connected at a conference or something like that and have stayed connected over the years. But you're doing great things. So I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. And yes, we go way back like car seats. I remember when we were both in the D&I space, I believe. And I remember my very first conference, I literally had just got promoted. And my very first conference I went to was Linkage in Atlanta, Georgia. You remember that?
Yes.
I remember meeting you at Linkage. And I was like, I know somebody here. And I was all excited.
That's awesome. I do remember that conference because I thought that was a really well-produced conference in my experience, and I learned a lot from that conference. You have such a great memory. I was thinking it was through Jeff Davis or some district conference at the at Toastmasters organization.
I think we connected virtually like that, maybe through Twitter, perhaps initially, but that was our first time meeting was in Atlanta, Georgia at Linkage. Yeah.
Wonderful. So let's dive right in and tell our listeners, this show is about being in the driver's seat. So Brian, when did you know you were in the driver's seat for your career?
Yeah, well, I mean, this story to kind of take you back. So of course now president and founder of Black Speakers Network, and so we're a nationwide speaker development and training company where we help speakers get clarity on starting or growing their speaking business. But Simone, if you've been sitting with me as a little boy, probably like 7 or 8 years old, like I was the kid, sitting in front of the television watching remember how they used to televise the NASA space shuttle launches?
Mm-hmm.
That was my jam. So I decided really early on that, man, I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. So like my career goal was originally to actually be a rocket scientist. And, so I started on that path, but I had some clues along the way. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, went through the Baltimore City public school system, ended up going to Morgan State University, which is actually one of the top engineering schools for Black professionals in the country. They've produced more Black engineers than any other school. So I was like, I'm going to Morgan State. I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. Well, I hit a little class called, I don't know if you had to go through this, Simone, but I hit a little class called Calculus 2, differential equations. And I was like, let me just go see what the School of Business is talking about. So I actually didn't make it through engineering school. I left early, and then subsequently, I was lost in my career when I was in school. I really didn't know what direction to go, and that's when I stumbled upon Toastmasters. So if you have been sitting next to me in a small class from Simone in 2006, you would have watched as I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and prepared to deliver my very first speech in Toastmasters. I'm sure you remember that experience as well, that first presentation. In my case, if you've been sitting in the front row, you would have noticed my sweaty palms, my shaking voice. At one point, somebody, I don't know who it was, somebody made the mistake of leaving the meeting room door open. So I almost walked out of the room during the middle of my presentation. All of these things were happening. I had the butterflies flying around in the stomach, but eventually I wrapped up my presentation and I noticed that, I was still alive. Of course, everyone in the room was clapping. And then, Toastmasters, I later realized we pretty much clap for everything. Like, you bring your lunch to the meeting, you get a round of
Nice.
applause. But the third thing I realized, yeah, it's crazy. And the third thing I realized was that, hey, if I can survive and thrive on one presentation, I can deliver two. And then two turned into four, four turned into six. I eventually got my first 10 speeches, and then started speaking outside of Toastmasters, and then I was off. So I knew I had to see planted early on that I really wanted to speak. But I didn't know of a career speaking, and the closest thing I got to it was when I entered into my corporate career. And so, I spent 11 years, Simone, working for a nationwide staffing recruiting firm. And I originally got into finance. And so I was literally a bill collector, a corporate bill collector. So working in accounts receivables, doing that. And my goal was to get into training and development. And I didn't even know that that was a career path before, but I eventually got into that role and started progression through corporate. So that was kind of some of the milestones there. But I want to take people back just to say that wasn't this like straight career path to certainly professional speaking what we have now. There were all these turns and readjustments, which I'm sure y'all talk a lot about on this show. So that was very much a part of the story.
So let me just get clear on the moment that you knew you were calling the shots, being a driver versus being a passenger. Is that the Toastmaster moment where you were able to shift things around and realize that speaking was your passion?
I think the moment was, if there was ever a moment, it was I went to lunch one day. So I would go and stalk like our professional development department. Like I was always hanging out on their floor. I sat on the fourth floor. They were on the second floor. So they were like, why is this kid always down here, dealing with us? And I was like, hey, I just want to find out what you do. Like all the thing I knew about speaking at the corporate level was training and being in front of the classroom. I just wanted to drop knowledge on people. So it was like, hey, come with us. So they took me across the street to lunch at a little restaurant called the Raspberry Deli. And on the back of a napkin, one of the trainers drew a model. It's called the ADDIE model. It stands for, there's an entire methodology, which I didn't know, Simone, behind training and development. And it's called instructional design. And so anytime that you're experiencing learning, it's kind of like the iceberg. We only see the top 20% of the iceberg. That's like sitting in the classroom, but there's an entire 80% underneath the water that participants never see. And so they drew that on the back of a napkin. And so the ADDIE model was learning how to analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate training. And so there's an entire master's program focused on it at UMBC. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so that was the moment where I really decided, because when you talk about being in the driver's seat and taking ownership of your career, before then, I was just kind of there. Like I was just, getting a paycheck. I was, hanging out on the second floor, just trying to hope something happens to me. Then I actually enrolled. I went back to grad school. I thought I was absolutely done with school, but I enrolled into the master's program for instructional design at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and started shifting my career in that direction. And also externally, I started to get more focused on my own development of speaking outside of the company. And so I started hosting my own professional development workshops, events, and things of that nature. So it's kind of like a dual track, but it all started on the back of a napkin across street.
Awesome. What I love about your story, Brian, is that you took us on a journey about your career. And I love what you said about it not being, linear. Like there's some twists and turns along the way, and we get to figure it out. There comes a point where something, some aha or some moment that just signifies to us, hey, I want more, and I've got to get invested in my career and take action. Because I certainly know I went to school to be a buyer. I should be selling, traveling the world. Well, maybe not now during COVID, but you know, I had a love of fashion, and it was a different story when I left college. Kind of like your, this isn't the class for me. Mine was economics and statistics, but you know, I love that the that the dots connected for you and took you to where you are today on your journey. But help us to understand, what is your formula for owning your career?
Yeah. So for me, a couple things. Number one is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And so I think oftentimes we're kind of looking up and like, oh, wow, you know, whatever it is, if it's a promotion, if it's taking on more responsibility, there's going to be something. They always say, you know, everything that you want in life is waiting for you, but it's right outside of your comfort zone. You know, there's going to be a stretch because you're learning new skills, you're flexing, you know, certain muscles. And so there's a little bit of pain associated with that. And I think that's fine. You're going to make mistakes. And the higher you go up, the more visible those mistakes could potentially be. But, you know, that's part of that. So that's number one. I think the second thing is getting really comfortable building relationships. And I don't mean like transactional relationships, but it's like, hey, what can Simone do for me? And I'm only going to reach out to her. But like one of the things I really learned, you know, during this period is really indoctrinating yourself into communities. And if you don't have a community, then you have the ability, as you know, more as we're taking ownership and thinking about this concept of creating a community, creating your own board of directors, creating your own um, support community of peers and people that can help bring different areas of expertise into your ecosystem. And so, you know, those things are pivotal, I think, and part of the reason why I created, you know, Black Speakers Network, because it was something that I didn't have. And so I wanted to create the community that I was looking for. And so, you know, those are some of the, I think, most important things to kind of think about. And the final thing is that, you know, just realizing that, you know, at the end of the day, people are people. Like most people are, you know, if you're working with somebody and, you know, a lot of times, I mean, Simone, I know you come from the project management world, you know, everything has deadlines, deliverables, like in any organization, there's a struggle for resources. You know, in training, we would always say, you know, do you want it good, fast, cheap, and then pick two of them because you're not going to get like all three. And so when it comes to being able to um, push your vision forward, you know, especially if you're in an organization and you're trying to create change, you're trying to, you know, move things forward, you're trying to create new processes, get people to buy into your vision for things. You know, people are people. Like people are going to have their own individual agendas every single day. People have their own ambitions, their own hope, their own habits, their own ways of doing things. And so you have to kind of slow down to speed up, which is one of my favorite sayings, not just when it comes to relationships, but with everything. Like you have to slow down and really learn how to bring people along with you and kind of meet people where they are and realize that not everybody has the same, you know, objectives. Not everybody has the same fire, the same energy as you do. For some may have less, some may have more, but you have to learn to kind of meet people, you know, where they are. So I would say those are the main things that my main formula, if you will, for that.
I love the slow down to speed up. And I want to come back to that because that may be the title of your episode. I love that a lot. Let's go back to community because oftentimes we don't know how to build community. We know that networking is essential to success. And some people don't even use the word networking, building community relationships that you talked about. You are very good at it, right? You know, that's one of your core strengths, I'd say, because you've built this Black Speakers Network platform to, I don't know if it's at 10,000 in the community
Awesome.
now. Almost. All right. Practically 10,000, but that's a significant number. So you know a thing or two about building community. Give us some strategies. Give the listeners some strategies on how they can effectively build community for career success.
Yeah, so I think part of it is finding a point of connectivity that's relevant for everybody. And so even within Black Speakers Network, and you look at, 10,000 speakers, we all have some fundamental things in common that we're striving for. And so I believe in, being able to intentionally call those things out. And so if it's things like, and, and, and part of it is not just, hey, we all want to be rich and we all want to like be on an island and stuff like that. It's more, what are the common things that we're all struggling with, myself included. And so I think part of that is, being explicit about that and saying, hey, guess what, guys, I suck at sales. I'm scared to pick up the telephone, or, I'm consistently undervaluing, how much I charge for my speaking fees, or, I'm afraid to double my price, like whatever those things are, being vulnerable and creating conversation around the real life issues that, your community is facing. And then not just sitting in that, but also doing the second thing, which is, leveraging resources. I don't think BSN, well, I know that Black Speakers Network, BSN, would not be the level at which we are if I was just trying to create a community around Brian, And so what I purposely try to do is bring in other subject matter experts, other thought leaders, other people who are passionate about different avenues of speaking, and let them shine. I don't need to be all things to everybody. In fact, I want to be very little to everybody so that one, the organization can keep going regardless of what Brian is doing. And then two, making sure that, people are able to bring their very best to the table, and then, folks can kind of learn from them. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then the third thing is systems. And that's the most important thing. Dr. George Frazier, one of the things he says all the time that I absolutely love is that, ideas are good, but systems are better. And systems are, oftentimes, particularly, within the Black community, we're talking about keeping the dollar in the Black community, support, buy Black, and even small businesses, buy small, things of that nature. We could talk about that all day long, but until there's a system in place to actually facilitate the economic exchange that we're talking about, very little is going to happen. And so for us, it isn't just, oh, let's like start a Facebook group and, hope that everybody starts working with each other. No, we slow down to speed up, and we created mechanisms like our platform partner program, which is, saying, hey, we have this amazing community of speakers, but let's be intentional about creating this amazing community of service providers that our speakers can leverage to be able to help grow their business. And by the way, we're going to allow them to speak and train on the platform as well. Let's create a community of event planners. Let's create a community of people that provide photography, videography, website development, all the things that people need. And so I think creating the system, the framework in which people can comfortably step into is a big part of the community. Like, it doesn't happen by accident. And some of the things that do happen by accident is really cool, because things will happen, people will connect with each other, strategic alliances will form that you could never even have thought of, but you got to have a foundation for people to start from.
I love that. And it's touching on two of the P's that I think about in career success. And one is having a plan. It sounds like there's a lot of forethought going into foundation and just the growth of the community. So we've got to have a plan in our careers. You've got to spend time thinking things through and allowing yourself to scale up. And then the second thing is exactly what you were talking about, which is about partnering, having that board of advisors, or I call it success squad, just identifying the key people who need to be a part of your team.
Yeah. And the only other thing I would add to that, Simone, is just having standards. And so oftentimes, particularly within the speaking industry, what we know is that new speakers tend to do is like, we want to like target everybody, like all, like, who do you speak to? Everybody. What do you solve? Everything. Like, I motivate, I inspire, I will like rock the house. And that might be, you may rock the house, but you're not going to, and there's 7 billion people on this planet. You're not going to reach all of them. Even if you reach 1% of them, that's still an amazing accomplishment. So I think getting very clear on who you serve and who you don't serve. And that's why I said building and being aligned with different communities. I'm not just part of Black Speakers Network. You know, I'm still involved in Toastmasters. I sit on the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce here. I'm in the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce. You know, I'm in you know, a variety of different other like business empowerment groups across the digital landscape. And so the goal is to be able to, you know, be surrounded and fed by the different organizations that serve a specific purpose. So you're not going to be all things to all people. But I think having a standard of knowing who you are, who you aren't, what you will tolerate, and also, you know, making that very clear is very important. One of the things that you know, we put up front right away in the Black Speakers Network community and any of our partners is that, you know, we're going to operate with integrity. We're going to operate in an ethical way. There's no putting people down. There's no you know, stealing ideas and all this other stuff. And if it comes to light that that's the case, then, you know, you'll be removed. And so I think maintaining the integrity of the community and honoring the integrity of the communities that you join is very, very important. And so that's the only other thing I would add to that.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about risk, Brian, because you had to take a risk to leave your corporate environment to step out in faith and step into your own thing. How can our listeners build an appreciation for taking risk for greater gain in their careers? Talk to us about your experience and any advice you can provide.
Yeah, so I'm probably one of the most risk averse persons you will meet, Simone. I'm not the guy that's like, oh yeah, you know, put it all on black, you know, at the roulette table type of thing. Like I'm actually a very measured, and if you think about it, you know, I'm a millennial technically. I spent 11 years working for the same company. And I've held different roles throughout that experience, but I wasn't the person that was like, oh yeah, you know, I'm mad, so I'm gonna quit during lunch and like figure it out and just go, right? Um, so so I believe in kind of like measured risk a little bit, and I don't think everybody needs to like take 11 years. I think a lot happened in that time period, but certainly I think there is value in taking a little bit of a measured risk. But you know, I have this whole program that talks about, you know, progress over perfection, and just realizing that very rarely will the format, the strategy in your mind link up with what's happening in real life, and you have to have like some buffer where you're ready to go. Mike Tyson says that, you know, everybody in life has a plan until you get punched in the face. And so, like, generally speaking, you got to be ready to go. In my particular case, I made a transition from corporate April 12th, 2019. But I started Black Speakers Network in 2016. And so that was 4 years of building a business, you know, 6 a.m. in the morning, 12 o'clock on my lunch break. And my core business hours was 7 p.m. to midnight, you know, for 4 years, plus Saturday and Sunday. You know, I wasn't traveling to events, you know, like that. I wasn't taking off work. So I had to build the business in a way that allowed me to still, you know, have a job and to be able to grow the business. And I honestly didn't take a ton of risk on that proportion of time. Like, we created a membership program. My very first digital product was only $5. It was a $5 PDF download called 51 Online Resources Defining Book Speaking Engagements. I came home Friday night. The product was done by I started working on it at 9 p.m. It was done by 2 a.m. Saturday morning. I emailed it out. I had my first customer by 9 a.m. Saturday morning. But I knew from $5, I can make $10, and 10, I can make 20. And if I make $5 online, I can make 5,000 online. If you make 5,000, you make 50,000. And so it's just a matter of scaling it. But, I'm not going to, stop paying rent to try to do it, right? And so you gotta grow within your own threshold. But for me, when I finally did leave corporate, it wasn't like this thing of, hey, I'm a ultra successful entrepreneur, see y'all later, thanks for everything, but I'm out. It wasn't really like that. There was a couple things that happened that made it easier to exit, because there was like some restructuring taking place within the organization, and it was fine. It wasn't like they were saying, hey, they actually wanted me to stay, but I knew, just kind of based on what was happening and based on where we were in our business, BSN had enjoyed, I think at that point, 18 months of continuous revenue growth, and it wasn't slowing down. We had just launched a book called Speak Up, and that came out in March, and I left in April. And so it was a lot of things happening. And so I was looking at the opportunity, and I was like, wow, if I wasn't working, I could literally go to different cities and we can host events to promote this book. Or, I could stay here, where it's a little bit safer, build some more revenue. Simone, I was like, okay, here was my form. Like, I wanted to have all my debt paid off, student loans included, pay off the car, pay off everything. I wanted to have 6 to 9 months of expenses in the bank. I wanted to, just kind of make sure that all of that was in place before I left. I didn't have none of that. Like, I still had that. I actually just paid off my car. I have a 2013 Nissan Altima. I just fully paid it off last month. So super excited about it. I had $1,000 left on it. I just wrote a check, paid it off. Great. I didn't get health insurance because I came off of health insurance, and it was like, oh, well, you had a qualifying life event, so you could just sign up. And then I totally missed that whole period, and I was trying to go through Cobra. So I finally had a friend that helped me get health insurance. I didn't get health and dental insurance back until January 1 of this year. You know what I'm saying? So I just stayed away from risky activities. I didn't go indoor rock climbing. I didn't go go-kart racing. I was just chilling, building my business for the latter half of the year. But my point is, stuff isn't going to be perfect. And so I think you kind of have to have a threshold that you're comfortable with, and just kind of be intuitive and listen to when life is telling you, like, now is the time. And, have some metrics in place, but not be so rigid that you won't take a risk and bet on yourself. Because the reality is that, if you need to generate income, you'll figure it out. You absolutely figure it out. And we have. I've not missed a meal. I've actually gained weight since we left. I've never, haven't been evicted, everything's fine. And in fact, I made, like, last month was like the highest revenue month I've had in business since I've started in all 4 years. So, it will work out.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. Bet on yourself. Absolutely. We must be our biggest advocates. So tell me, Brian, are there resources online or otherwise that you would recommend to people to really learn how to own their careers?
Yeah, a ton. Well, I'll say this: for people that are planning to transition into full-time entrepreneurship, I think that's a different thing. But sometimes we kind of get particularly if you're in a really great career, you invested all this money potentially in education, the company is investing a lot of money for you, you feel a certain sense of loyalty there. And I think that's fine. And you should, really just think about how your career complements, what you're potentially able to do in your business. But, you have to make a choice at some point. You have a certain amount of time in a day, yes. But more importantly, you only have a certain amount of creative energy in the day. And like, once it's gone, it's gone. So for me, like, I was giving the vast majority of my creative energy to my employer, and it made sense kind of at the time because they were giving me the vast majority amount of money that I needed to run my life. But when that started to shift, you gotta shift proportionally. But some of the biggest books that I recommend, or resources, The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman is like the Bible to me, just in terms of like business acumen, learning all the fundamental areas of business, sales, operations, marketing, accounting, value creation. Like, he breaks it down. Like, that's the book I wish I had picked up the minute that I left engineering and went into like business school, because I started taking all these classes and I was like, I don't even know how these classes connect. And that book helps you connect the dots. The other book that I really recommend for people that are like in transition mode is by Delatoro McNeil, and it's called Caught Between a Dream and a Job. I think that book is excellent in terms of like laying out exactly what we're talking about. Like, what should you be doing 6 a.m., 12 p.m., and 7 p.m. to make sure that you're like advancing towards your dream.
Thank you, Brian. Those are great resources that have not been mentioned in our 3 seasons. So thank you for sharing that, for sure. As we begin to wrap up this podcast, are there any parting words or advice that you would give to others wanting to own their careers?
Yeah. So I think oftentimes, this concept of ownership gets like misconstrued, because, sometimes we think of like ownership as, hey, I'm the CEO of this major company and I have like staff and budget and payroll, like all these different things. But regardless of, what level you're in an organization, if you're an individual contributor, if you're a manager, senior manager, director, vice president, all the way up to the CEO, and even in your own business, like, ownership is 100% your responsibility as it relates to the outcomes that you want to see in your life. So I would just encourage people to, if you look around, and that's anything, like if you look around your house and you got papers sitting in the corner, you can clean it up. Like, if you look in your bank account and you don't like the number that's there, you can increase it. If you look at the bottom of your pay stub and you're like, man, I don't like the number of days that I have, like vacation, PTO, whatever you call it, like, you can change that. Like, every single thing in your life is within your locus of control. And I think if we collectively begin to embrace that, the ownership, and I love the word that you use, Simone, because that's what we're talking about. Once you begin to take ownership over your life and see that you have the capacity and the responsibility to change it, then everything else goes away. So like, if you don't like your commute, if you don't like your boss, if you don't like your coworkers, that's another thing. But you could like all of that stuff, but still desire something better, and that's fine too. But just know that your life could be totally, your life could be totally different 12 months from now with a few small decisions. Completely different. I wake up now, Simone, I'm like, like, what do I want to do? Do I want to go get coffee? Yesterday I did an hour bike ride. If I don't feel like working with clients, I don't. I can't travel right now because of COVID. But outside of that, I can pretty much do anything I want. And I'm sitting. I actually got this car magazine now. I mean, you can't probably, well, nobody can see it because we're on audio. But I'm reading like DuPont Registry. I'm like looking at like sports cars and stuff like that. Why not? Because you can control it. Like, I'm not going to be driving an Altima forever. So that's the big
So you're working the plan now. I love it.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Brian, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Can you please tell our listeners how they can stay in contact with you?
Yeah, so two things. The easiest way to get in contact with me directly, I would say, is LinkedIn. I'm kind of filling up on Facebook. So if you've got a pending Facebook request from me, don't worry about it. But LinkedIn is easy. And then if you want to stay connected with Black Speakers Network specifically, just join our free community on Facebook. You can just search Black Speakers Network and then get plugged into the Facebook group.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for all the wisdom that you have shared with our listeners.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or two about it.